Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session in the MIT AI conference, The Future of Work. Today, this session, we're introduced to Anand Babu, who is with Google Research, formerly the founder of Sidewalk Labs with Google. He is going to speak with us today about America's crises and the Silicon Valley's third era of institutional innovation. Anand, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll hand off to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. I want to talk with you this morning about a dream, the public broadcasting dream that was really about the future of learning and also work in this country. And I want to start with a little clip. We're all here at home. I've got 3 children in the next room, and so I figured we'd start with Mr. Rogers.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
This is Mr. Rogers through the years. He premiered at a time of very deep civil unrest for the country. And you can think about sort of seeing someone like this on sort of televisions in people's living rooms as being a little surprising. This isn't what you were used to seeing on TV. And it was a bold move. It was a bold move to try to create relationships with children for the purpose of delivering entertainment and education. And really the education and growth piece of public television is just not to be underestimated. I want to play another clip. This is from just a few years after the Watts riots in LA. Huge amount of civil unrest. And here we see Mr. Rogers with Officer Clemens in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Hey, there's Officer Clemens. Hi, Officer Clemens. Come in.
Rogers, how are you?
Fine, won't you sit down?
Oh, sure, just for a moment.
It's so warm, I was just putting some water on my feet.
Oh, it sure is.
Would you like to join me?
It looks awfully enjoyable, but I don't have a towel or anything.
Oh, you share mine.
Okay.
Sure.
Around the country, they didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools.
So as you heard, this was a time where not only was there civil unrest in the streets, we still had de facto segregation. And here was a show that was in the living rooms of millions of people, approaching 2 very contentious topics in a way that was approachable to the nation's children. Really remarkable to think about sort of the political coalition, the coalition of people that came together to make something like this happen. And it was also a time where things were generally on an upswing for the U.S. And you saw just an enormous confidence in our ability to tackle deep social problems. Sesame Street took this to another level. It's just sort of 10 times the funding or more than Mr. Rogers. And it was very risky. There was no financial incentive for the initial duo, lots of personal risk, political risk. And it was really remarkable that foundations were able to step in and get this off the ground. The risks they took weren't just sort of personal or weren't just contained to the time. There was really a risk they took in creating this place called Sesame Street. And to be clear, it wasn't like everything was perfect in the 60s. Sesame Street wasn't about the America of the 60s. It was about the America that people dreamed about, the America they wished existed. And it was a place where creativity, science, black, white, poor, and rich, all those differences came together to make something great. And the risk that was taken here, again, was huge. I want to talk about something that happened maybe on the way to that dream. If you look at the last 30 or 40 years, there's been a phenomenon that we've seen quietly, but now I think it's actually in our face, which is that rich folks have gotten better at, in some ways, sort of isolating themselves from the rest of society as compared to poor people. And you see this really in this chart. It shows kind of the blue bands, which are people that live in largely majority high-income neighborhoods, getting bigger, and the same thing happening on the lower end. And this isn't just about statistics. This is also about sort of lived experience as it relates to how people learn and how they access opportunity. So just to highlight a couple examples of lived experience. First, here's a picture that many people will see as familiar. MIT, really a symbol of American sort of superiority in higher education and the amazing institutions we've been able to build. But back when I was choosing undergrads in the 90s, I was really fortunate to get into MIT. But it's not cheap, and we decided to go to state school. Everything worked out great. But this dynamic, the financial accessibility, which is not just when you enter, but all the preparatory work that goes into it, it's a big deal. And in fact, if you look at MIT's undergrad class, over 60% comes from the top 20% earning households in the country. So 60% just from the top fifth. You look at that and you wonder, have we really made progress towards a fair and just society? I want to talk about another experience. After college, I moved to Chicago. Here we see Cabrini Green. It's one of the nation's most notorious housing projects. In the background, the building you see is called Bankroll. It's in the name of every building was nicknamed for its role in the underground economy. The drugs, it's part of the war on drugs. And in some ways, it's not surprising that the economy was underground because the residents barely had a shot at the economy above ground. This was a place that was systematically excluded from regional transportation, from access to jobs. It was a place where, the schools, in the foreground is actually a school here. The schools acted like prisons, and over-policing was just woven deep into the fabric of that place. In fact, I had an unfortunate situation where I was trying to report police abuse while living there, and I ended up spending a night in jail. And there was really very little accountability for police. And you see this in all kinds of forms today. There's mass incarceration. You've got sort of this school to prison system that's just really entrenched. Now I want to take us to the present. We've got a really number of issues coming together at this moment with COVID. But I want to highlight one, which is that we've got literally billions of kids around the world, especially, this is facing folks that are less advantaged, that just have no access to school anymore. And if we look forward to the fall, we can all look at the headlines. Things are not going to be pretty. And so we're having a situation where, people on the middle and upper end of the spectrum, they're going to patch together tutoring. But we're about to see, millions of kids, here in America be left behind. You're talking about 12 months that has compounding disadvantages. And I'll talk about sort of why I think this is also a systemic point, potentially of disruption for education more broadly. So look, it's not all doom and gloom. I want to talk about a reason to be incredibly optimistic. It starts actually with kind of an insight that is not new. I want to play a clip from Jim Henson back when he was an advertising person.
Put your money in here and you get a cup of Wilkins coffee. I don't want any. Then push that button. How about a cup of Wilkins?
With this camera, I shoot pictures of people who don't drink Wilkins coffee. I'm ready. Shoot. Anybody else?
You'll like it.
So this is definitely Wilkins coffee. After seeing an ad like that, how can you not be forced to drink Wilkins coffee? So Jim Henson was, really kind of ahead of its time using animation, short format, film to engage people on all kinds of topics. And this was not lost on the creators of Sesame Street. They realized that if they wanted to achieve their mission, they had to use the most edgy, the most modern capabilities of their day. And Jim Henson and his coffee ads were one of those. And when we think about the present state, I want to talk about probably the area where AI has had the most impact, which is media. We look at how we consume information. AI is working behind the scenes in a million different ways. No company probably better exemplifies that, and also is some of the controversy of it, than ByteDance, which is behind TikTok. This is the logo you see on the right. And in some ways, you could say that they've given billion plus people the ability to be as engaging as Jim Henson through the tools that they created, the feeds that they're able to populate with interest-based recommender systems, and the entire network around it. And it's really quite remarkable that we're able to create these incredibly engaging mediums from millions of creators working together behind the scene. And again, I want to talk about the other piece of Sesame Street that maybe doesn't go as noticed, which is not only was there sort of fun, engaging Muppets in the street, there was really some very deep foundational knowledge and wisdom that was being imparted on children. Here's a clip with Oscar the Grouch.
Old Nasty Dan was the meanest man I ever knew. He'd stomp and scream and be real mean the whole day through. He'd frown a bunch, he ate nails for lunch, and he'd never laugh. Well, I'd like.
So here's I think Johnny Cash. Amazing to get marquee performers on a kids show, and Oscar the Grouch going back and forth. And today we call this social emotional learning. Kids are trying to understand their feelings, trying to understand how to communicate them. Sesame Street was incredibly leading edge in incorporating modern curriculum knowledge, and then not only incorporating it, but testing and measuring. So they were probably one of the earliest users of eye tracking in educational media in a meaningful way. They set up experiments where they tried to distract kids while they were watching the Muppets to see whether they were succeeding. And so, similar to the AI feeds we have today that are really measuring every part of a user's journey and engagement, there was incredibly advanced and novel use of measurement technologies.
Old Nasty Dan was the mean.
So if we look at the Sesame Street era, there was already a lot of amazing things happening with attracting people's interests, albeit in a very expensive and precious way with essentially hiring the Jim Hensons of the world. They had the ability to engage people in really important topics, whether that was racial justice, as we saw earlier, or even social emotional learning. And they were along the way measuring these learning journeys, albeit in very expensive traditional research ways. One thing they didn't have was really a way for kids to be involved, at least at scale, for them to integrate, to share, which is one of the most critical parts of education. And so this is an area where I want to just kind of share with you some of the things that I think could be really exciting in innovation opportunities, not in 5 years or 10 years, but maybe even in the next 12 months during this time of need. So first of all, when we talk about attracting kids' interests, one of the most amazing things when you look at these AI feeds, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, or here you see a YouTube sort of recommendations, is that we've been able to take this ecosystem of literally millions and millions of amazing creators, and then match it with the millions and millions of idiosyncratic interests that each of us have. These are interests that are largely very healthy. They encourage us to be curious and encourage us to go deeper and explore. Here's a snapshot of my 6-year-old's recommendations, and I thought I'd just play one. He's clearly obsessed with baseball. There's just kind of hints at where you can take these idiosyncratic kind of curiosities.
Oh my God. All right, what up, people? Welcome back to the channel. I'll be right back into another IRL baseball video. And today we are going to answer the most commonly asked question in the entire universe. Can you build a baseball bat out of plastic straws? Who knows? But we're going to find out today. Let's go build this bad boy.
So that actually may be the most commonly asked question amongst 6-year-old kids like Roshan. And here's a creator that is just over the top, incredibly engaging, and no discredit to Roshan's first grade teacher, but it's much easier for us to start with the engaging creator and work backwards, than to all of a sudden assume that we're and ask say the existing kind of educational institutions to get to this capability. Now, okay, so we're just sort of building bats out of straws. What's the big deal? But it's really where you take this. Here's another creator. I'll play this clip really briefly.
Is called a beam bridge. When we say simple, we really do mean simple. A beam bridge can be just a log that you use to walk across a stream, or put a long strip of cardboard between 2 short blocks. That's a beam bridge.
So we're going from constructing a bat out of straws. Maybe the next thing to do is see what it takes to break that in the form of a beam bridge. Again, another amazing creator, really connecting with kids in a way that's natural, and really kind of across different age levels and grade levels. The last piece of this that is, I think, new, and it's sort of a new opportunity in sort of our AI age, is how do you bring the kid, the viewer, the user, if you will, into the experience, which is essential to the learning journey. Here we see an app that was shipped, experimental app by Google a few years ago, where it invites the user to sketch in a very, very simple way, and the AI understands and generates a very similar icon. And what you see here is a really interesting ability for AI to take a low resolution input, if you will, and convert it to something much more high res or much more appropriate given the task. And this is a capability that's emerging very, very rapidly. And it's the kind of thing that has a lot of potential, but a lot of risks. And I just want to kind of highlight one of the areas where I think that we can really potentially push the limits of technology like that. And that's in what we think about today as gaming, but really a medium, these sort of sandbox style games that I think has tremendous potential for learning and education. And I want to play another short clip, continuing on that theme of building and construction. Here's a sandbox with a really highly realistic physics engine working behind the scenes.
Materials. It's a physics engine when it comes to fluid, when it comes to gas. Look at the smoke. Look at that. You can start a fire and then blow a hole in a wall, and then the fire will fill the room. And look at this is insane. Look at this. This is ridiculous. And this is the future. Now, of course, this is a project that uses voxel technology. If you don't know what voxel is, 3D pixels, kind of like Minecraft, except on a...
So imagine if my 6-year-old could come into an environment like this, create his own structures, and then of course, as a 6-year-old would love to do, blow them up and see what happens. And maybe share that or do that with his friends. These are the kinds of experiences that we can build tomorrow, not in 10 years. And what you see here is how engaging they can be, and how potentially you can think about them actually as being vehicles for educating people on fairly deep concepts. And yes, it's very risky. There's weapons here, but gosh, it was pretty risky to put so-called Muppet violence on television in the 70s. And so I think that this is the kind of thing that has a lot of potential, but it's going to require us to think differently. And then the last example I want to highlight is this potential of actually bringing people into a story. So if you think about, say, the Oscar the Grouch clip, where he was clearly dealing with some emotional baggage. Well, what if you could be the kid that helps Oscar the Grouch? What if you could actually get invited in using technologies like augmented reality into an experience? And what does that do for your integration of those concepts? I think there's a lot of potential here that we're just scratching the surface. The last thing I want to touch on is measurement. So measurement, if we're actually trying to help kids, measurement's critical. We can't just hope that they watch a lot of stuff and things will get better. And I think on the measurement front, there's also a lot of opportunity for innovation. If you look on the left here, this is an example of a parent that meticulously transcribed their kids speaking when they were alone at night, putting themselves to bed. And this turns out to be a very powerful tool for actually gauging language acquisition. It's a very useful predictor, because kids are actually more comfortable practicing novel language concepts when they're kind of alone by themselves than in social situations. Well, we now have the ability to potentially actually do this kind of transcription exercise for everyone, maybe even all the time. Now, this is where we quickly get into tremendous issues around power and trust, which kind of leads me to potentially what I think is the real both issue and opportunity here, which is the institutional crises that we're facing at the moment. On the public sector side, we're going to see, and this is just one survey. There's many of these surveys around kind of people's plans for next fall in the U.S. what you tend to see is, as I mentioned earlier, the higher you are on the income side, the more you're voting with your dollars to take your kid into a quasi-private environment. And this is potentially going to have massive destabilizing effects that are actually really hard to predict. What happens to the voting base that used to turn out for schools? What happens when you have a series of states that are going through bankruptcy and have huge educational obligations? Small points of enrollment change, actually has a huge impact on your sort of political support base. So, on the one hand, we've got a crisis of confidence in public institutions that are tackling critical educational efforts. On the other hand, you have the rise of very, very powerful capabilities with AI and media, best exemplified by feeds like ByteDance, and maybe even new measurement capabilities like I was just hinting at, coming to the mix. So is that the future? Well, there's huge trust challenges. I mean, not to pick on ByteDance, but there's huge trust challenges with saying, hey, private sector, go figure this out, on your own. And so I think a huge part of this has to be what I think about as institutional innovation. How do we bring this world, this incredible world of engaging creators together with the incredible technical and engagement capabilities, embedded in the private sector, along with the public trust, the public coalition building that was once represented by institutions like PBS. How do we bring those things together? This sounds daunting, but again, I want to come back to Sesame Street. If you kind of put yourself back in that era, they did something that was really kind of crazy. They had a concept with huge pedagogical risk, huge business risk, but they were able to raise a tremendous amount of seed capital. They were able to secure the equivalent of billions in distribution, very, very different media structure at the time. And they did that by not just being an act of Congress. They actually very cleverly pooled together private, public, and frankly, social capital in a way that let them be very agile, take risk, and be nimble. So, I think there's a tremendous opportunity that's really pressing right now for us to rethink learning in the age of AI and the age of media, in an age where, frankly, we are not going to have traditional schooling for the bottom, particularly the bottom end of our population. We need to really innovate. And I'm really passionate about the opportunity here, and I'd love to continue the conversation, whether Q&A or offline. Please feel free to reach out to me. As the introducer mentioned, I'm at Google Research, and so if there's technical things that I mentioned that you're excited about or working on, I'd love to hear from you. I'm also a board member in an organization called Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Our job on some level is to help push the innovation frontier in how institutions are designed. How do we bring together public capital, private capital to help innovators take risk? So if you have ideas on that front, would love to hear from you. With that, I'll close. Let's build.
Wonderful, Anand. Thank you so much for that and your time and your fascinating work. We do have a couple questions that we have just a couple minutes to go over. First question from Anonymous is, what's the name of the physics engine in the video? It seemed really cool.
That is a great question that I don't have the answer to on the top of my head, and I'll put on notes later.
Yeah, sounds great. Simon D is asking, you touched on it briefly, but how to measure and compare the impact of such media on children, especially when it comes to complex issues of empathy and race?
It's a great question. I think that the same way that you need multi-layered approaches, and that's what they used in the 60s, everything from quantitative and qualitative. I think we need the same techniques here. You're not going to be able to answer everything through telemetry. And then who's involved? I mentioned this, but clearly who and how systems like this are developed is as important as what it is that you're actually writing lines of code against. And so that's something that, if you go back to children's educational television, Sesame Street did a brilliant job. If they had issues there, there was issues with, were they able to treat gender equality issues, the same treatment of racial equality. And so the who and the how here is as important as the what.
Great, thank you. There's one final question. We're at the end of time, but maybe you can go on afterwards from Eric E and answer this. His question was, a current tendency for algorithms is to adjust to the user's tastes. Are there efforts ongoing to push the boundaries of the user or open their aperture?
It's a great question. I won't have the time to address it here. I will say that one of the things that's really exciting about even learning and education as a space is it's a place where potentially we can think about open sourcing, huge aspects of the systems that are designed to build for these. And when you look at a topic like recommender systems, incredibly complex. It's very hard for researchers today to fully explore the dynamics around recommender systems, and there's assumptions that people make that are not necessarily true in reality. And so if we can actually push the frontier of open source systems in this space, I think that we'll advance learning and progress very, very rapidly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anand. We appreciate your time, and it was really great to learn about the research that you're doing, and I'm definitely going to go out and watch that video about how to build a bat out of plastic straws.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And for our